Franchise Hockey Manager, from the makers of the award-winning Out of the Park Baseball series, is a fascinating strategy game that puts you in charge of a professional hockey team as you try to guide it to a championship and then turn it into a dynasty. Choose the scope of your challenge. Do you want to find out how well you could run a team in today's hockey world? Take control of any team in over 20 playable leagues, ranging across the world from Canada to Japan and from junior hockey to the highest pro levels. Or if your favorite team hasn't been too successful recently, how about starting play in any real season back to 1931? And if neither of those options interest you, create your own hockey universe. The heart of the game, the on-ice simulation, has been completely rebuilt from the ground up in Franchise Hockey Manager 2. The result is incredible statistical accuracy, extremely detailed play-by-play descriptions, and more opportunities to exercise tactical control of your team. You can precisely plan out your team's tactics to take advantage of your strengths and exploit your opponent's weaknesses. You can save and show off those plans to other players, or if you'd like, borrow someone else's winning tactics. But the on-ice game is only half the battle. To succeed, you'll need to master the front office as well. Scout, draft, sign, trade, and train your players to build your team into an unstoppable juggernaut. The players, though, may have their own ideas about your decisions, and keeping them happy is part of the challenge. And your team's owner will always be looking over your shoulder. Lose too often, and you'll be looking for a new employer. Come discover the challenge of hockey management and the many improvements we've made to the newest version of the game. Available for PC and Mac on Steam and from other major retailers.
Fred Britzi, unfortunately, as Steven would say, your host for this evening, and we have the pleasure, the great honor, the fantastic chance of interviewing, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Jeff Riddolls. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing good, Fred, and yeah, you did pronounce it correctly.
That's amazing, because I usually butcher anything that's English.
Well, that's English, and you got it right. Good going.
Awesome. So you're joining us from Canada, is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, Kelowna, British Columbia.
Very nice. Active gaming industry over there?
Fairly active. I mean, a lot in Vancouver. You know, EA Sports says they're big operation there. And then over in Alberta and Edmonton, BioWare up north. So fairly busy. Not a whole lot locally. I think the one big thing that's going on game-wise here is, I forgot the name now. The kids' website.
I'm not sure. Can't help you.
Club Penguin. There we go. That's the one thing that's happening here in Kelowna. So not a whole lot.
Okay, because that got me a little bit confused at first. I know Brad Cook. We did an interview with Out of the Park Baseball, OOTP Development, same company, and he was based in California. So does that mean that you guys as a studio operate remotely?
Yep, we do. Brad is down in Chico, California, a little ways north of San Francisco, Bay Area. And we've got another developer in Toronto, Matt Arnold, who works on the baseball game. Our regular PR guy, I think you were talking to, Cole Hobson, he's out Eastern Canada, Moncton, New Brunswick. But the bulk of the company, the other 7 people and the headquarters are all in Hamburg in Germany.
How's that? How is that experience working across the lands, across the continents like this for games that require so much research, so much coordination, I imagine, between teammates just to get them going and to get them polished the way you want to. Do you guys find this difficult, or with technology today, it's pretty much a given, it's no worries?
It's definitely workable. It makes for a lot of long nights because the hours don't really match up very well. So either I stay up late or they get up very early or some combination of that. Because I'm normally working with Sebastian and Malta, the two coders on the team in Hamburg.
You're always going to have someone grouchy on those Skype calls.
Pretty much, yep.
Fair enough. All right, well, we want to get into the games. So, guys, we're obviously here today to speak about the Franchise Hockey Manager 2 game that recently came out, and we are talking to the producer. Before we even get into what that means for you, Jeff, what a producer entails, even though that may sound a little bit straightforward, we like to ask those stupid questions here at OP Noobs. Can we even take a step back and talk about you as a gamer and a hockey fan? Have you been? Are you at all a gamer? Because you must be a hockey fan.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm Canadian, so I've been a hockey fan since birth pretty much. But yeah, I've got a really long background in gaming. Computer gaming, I think I probably the first ones I played, oh boy, sometime early 80s, Commodore 64. So
Okay, yeah.
going back about 30 years now. I'm 45, so I've been around a little bit.
Sounds like you've
A-
done it all.
And yeah, I've been played pretty much any sort of hockey game, hockey simulator, and I've also I'm a
What's
big.
what's the
Go
best
ahead.
one in your opinion? Out of all the hockey games, which one's the best one?
Well, my own, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, of course, and it states on the website that you have the very words best, and we'll talk about that because I'm not gonna let that go so easily. But
But
before we even get there, like yeah, maybe even some titles in
yeah,
the
back
sports.
then, the one big one, my favorite way back in the day, probably I guess would have been early mid '90s, was a game called Hockey League Simulator 2, which was put out by all people, Bethesda.
Oh wow,
Yeah, they originally the first game I played from Bethesda was Wayne Gretzky Hockey,
oh, that's
and
yeah, I
yeah,
did not on PC. I assume on
yeah,
PC.
on PC. Yep, believe it or not. And I think they actually had an Amiga version of it too back then.
Yeah, that must
Uh,
have been in the early 90s, I want to say.
yep, way back then, and it was actually a pretty well received game. But obviously, they got out of the sports game industry and moved on to bigger and better things. But before
Yeah.
they did that, they did this little sort of spin-off off of the Wayne Gretzky hockey project, just called Hockey League Simulator, and then eventually Hockey League Simulator 2, the sequel to it, which was a lot like the games we're playing now, only you couldn't you the focus was more on just a single season and not playing year to year the way modern games do. But for the time, it was really remarkable.
And yeah, you as somebody who knows those games in depth, you'd argue that that's the game that kind of influenced and defined the genre.
Pretty much. Well, there's also East Side Hockey Manager, which is came along a few years later. My friend Riz Remus and at Sports Interactive, who of course do Football Manager. That's their big game. They did that. Started that in 2003 against. I think it was the first Sports Interactive version of East Side Hockey Manager. I actually worked on that back then, just originally as a volunteer, and then doing a lot of the research work and a few other things for them. Uh, that unfortunately Sega canned it after a couple of seasons, and they brought it back recently on Steam. But it's kind of funny now because I put a lot of work into that game originally, and
Sure.
now I'm competing directly with
Sure.
it.
That was my next question, actually. You're not looking at RPGs or action games or even FPS. This is a relatively well-defined and small style of game. So I'm assuming all of you in that crowd, in that you guys know each other. I'm assuming, no, all of
Pretty much, yeah. I
most of
mean, to
you at least.
varying degrees. I mean, since I've worked with SI before, I know a lot of the guys over there, particularly Riz and Mark Vaughn, Mark Duffy, a few of the others, guys that work on either the hockey game or on Football Manager.
Okay, and do you find that it's actually a healthy environment? You guys pick up ideas off of each other, bounce it off, or actually there's competition and it's actually quite secretive what you're coming up next from
Well,
one studio to the
since they
next.
brought EHM back, it's a little more secretive because we can't really be talking about game details with each other, and as in you can all sorts of bad things can potentially happen with. Hey, wait a second! I told you about this. Why is it in your game now?
Yeah, and in any case, the gaming industry as a whole, many would say, is quite secretive. It's a secretive environment, even more so than Hollywood. So I'm not surprised. We're gonna talk about the game, and there's a lot to say about it. I have a collection of questions. I hope you'll enjoy. I've enjoyed doing a little bit of research. As I've told you pre-show, I am not an expert on these types of games, but a lot of questions come to my mind when I start thinking about the type of gamers who are attracted to these games. Are they, most likely hardcore sports fan? I don't really imagine many gamers outside of the gaming scene, outside of gaming. I mean, just being attracted by those games. And that's why before we even get into the conversation about the game itself, do you think that you guys basically developing your games, and whether it's a baseball game or a hockey game, I think the question remains the same. Are you guys developing games in mind that you have a niche of a market, a niche of an audience, and you're really not looking to to attract anybody outside of that field? Or are you guys actually developing a game thinking, no, we want in those development meetings that you're having remotely, are you guys saying, how can we make this accessible to people who may not be attracted to hockey?
Oh yeah, that's definitely an ongoing discussion with us. The core market obviously is the hardcore hockey fan. That's the base, and we've got to keep them happy and do things that they expect. There's a certain well, the expectations they have to be met, because we're not going to go anywhere without keeping those people happy. But aside from that, you still want it to be a good game and accessible to people who are either even not necessarily hockey fans or hockey fans, but not big PC gamers. So you have to find a balance there. But I mean,
but between the two crowds, there might exist a conflict of interest, wouldn't you say? Because it's the same thing as in the MMO universe in a way. If you make the game too accessible, in a way, you're gonna have to numb it down. And
yeah,
I guess
like you see happening with World of Warcraft.
Exactly.
Over the years, I've played that since near the beginning, and yeah.
I used to love it. Now not so much, because they've numbed it down to an extent where.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling. Believe me.
Yeah, so you're losing the hardcore crowd that actually made this game great. Because if I've done my research correctly, your community is actually very, very active in the development of the game, to the extent that you rely on the community to get your game where it needs to be. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a lot of volunteers working on different things. Our researcher team is almost entirely volunteers. I do a lot of the work myself too, but we've got people from all over the world. There's 22 different leagues you can play in I think it's about 15 different countries. So there's obviously a big international research effort. And those guys are always, asking them, saying, okay, well, my league could be represented a little bit better. We've got to model this rule correctly. So that's really where the balancing comes in at the moment, where we have to decide, okay, how much resources is it going to take to get this certain thing modeled in the game, whether it's go ahead.
In many ways, that's my next question. You guys cover 21 playable leagues, if I'm correct, from North America to Europe and Asia.
Yep.
And so research must be a very big part of game development for the studio. Can you tell us how you go about it? How do you get it all up to date? Do you guys have like an army of minions behind you or something?
Not quite an army, but yeah, we've got a couple of dozen people on and off. I mean, not everyone is working on it constantly. Some come, some go, and contribute where they can. But we've got a dozen or so people, at any given time, working regularly on it. Just going through the rosters in our database, and if someone gets moved to a new team in real life, they've got to move them over there. Players develop, if the information in the database is a little off, we make some changes there. Right now, the big project we've got going is in getting some historical statistics imported into the game. We've got an agreement with EliteProspects.com, which is a big hockey roster and stats website. And we're now just interfacing with them and getting everything from their database, or at least as much as we can, into ours. So when you look back, when you open up a player in the game, you see his actual history for the last 10 years or whatever.
And is that feed ongoing in the sense that it's a live feed that move forward?
Not live. It's got to be. It's a little complicated because they do things a little bit differently in their database with certain data structures. So we've got to do a lot of work by hand. That's actually, I've been up since about 9 o'clock this morning.
Jeez, sorry to keep you up.
Oh, I'll be here long after we finish this.
I know the feeling. But, yeah. I'm also in that type of crazy work scenario.
But yeah, I've been working on that all day, and we've had a few other researchers stepping over to help us out with that little project. So yeah, we've got a big team of people, all communicating via Skype, email, forums, whatever else we find convenient, and
I'm sure
it works so far.
I'm sure actually the professional hockey scene, all the big websites, the big companies that really drive the industry, the sports industry that is hockey, are very happy to connect with you and to feed into the gaming universe. But I may be wrong. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Well, it really depends on the individual company or site. I mean, some people want to get paid, and we can't always give them exactly what they want. But it's nice when we can work out something with a site like Elite Prospects and be able to get them, get a deal in place that works for them and works for us. And eventually the big one would be getting a National Hockey League license, which we don't have yet. We just got one for the baseball game in the last couple of years, so that's definitely something we want to work towards. And then once we've got that, we'll be able to get you can hopefully pull information from their site and use the official logos and all of that neat stuff.
Okay, that's one thing for partnerships. What about the team itself, the inside team, the people who are passionate about what they're doing? You sound like, if you're going to work so hard on this game, you sound like you must be a heavy hockey fan, passionate about it. What drove you to FHM too?
Oh yeah, a huge hockey fan. Well, like I was saying earlier, I've played all various hockey games through the years, and then worked on Eastside Hockey Manager when it was in its first version, or first 2 or 3 versions before the game, before that was shut down. And back, I guess it would have been about 3-4 years ago, I had heard that Out of the Park Developments, who was of course well known for Out of the Park baseball, had decided to do a hockey game. And actually, it was one of the guys I used to work with on EHM that passed word over to me that said, "Hey, these guys are starting up a hockey game, and you've got all this experience. You should talk to them." So I got in touch with Sebastian Pelkowski, who's our lead developer, and started talking to him and said, he had obviously a lot of questions about the way things should be done and some ideas he wanted to do. And I said, I gradually started helping out and explaining how he had done things on other projects. And that sort of snowballed from there. Then beginning of 2013, I think it was, right near the start of the year, 2013. I wasn't tracking my years now.
Sure.
Yeah, and then right near the start of that year, we were getting close to the release date, and the game wasn't quite where they wanted to be yet. So they suggested that I come on full time, and I've been there ever since.
As the producer. So what does it entail? What do your responsibilities entail? What does it mean to be a producer for a game like this?
A little bit of everything, really. I do a lot of the design work for the new match engine that generates all the stats and plays the games out. That's mostly my design and Sebastian's coding. I do a lot of the other things like artificial intelligence, designing that type of system, and then as well, the research work that I've mentioned, going in and entering all the individual ratings and stats for players and teams and getting all that set up. Doing the occasional podcast.
Of course, the PR as well. You sound like you're wearing many hats.
Yep, that's part of the thing. You're a small team. Everybody has to do. You can't really afford to have people pigeonholed into one small into really highly specialized task. Everybody does a little bit extra. Sometimes we'll bring somebody from the Out of the Park team. Even Marcus himself will come over and give us a little hand with or suggestions now and then. We've got a discussion going on right now about roster management, artificial intelligence, and the way he does certain things in the baseball game, and how we can apply those to improve the AI in the hockey game.
Okay, well, let's focus on the game itself and a little bit. There's 3 modes, if I'm correct. There's the modern mode, the historic, and the fictional custom mode. Can you describe each and who it might better who each mode might better appeal to?
Well, the modern mode is basically that's the core game, the where most people are going to wind up playing, where you start in the current season and you can take over any real team within the 21, 22 playable leagues we have. Typically, a lot of people will take their favorite National Hockey League team and play that, but you can play in Sweden, Russia, Germany.
Which one is yours? Just to piss some people in the chat off.
I'm a Vancouver Canucks fan. That'll piss a few people off.
Fair enough. I had to do it. Sorry,
we're not too popular.
Go ahead.
Yeah. That's the modern mode. You start in 2015, and basically try to build up your team and win a championship the first year, but try to make yourself as strong as possible over an ongoing period. You can play 20 years, 30 years, however many years you want. Or if you're starting out in a lower level league, like a Canadian Junior League, you can start at that level and work your way up. If you're successful at that level, you'll get job offers from slightly higher reputation leagues, and work your way up to the NHL that way if you don't want to start there right to begin with. The historical mode is somewhat similar to that. The difference is you can go back, you can only play in the NHL, but you can go back as far as 1931 and start any historical season in there with any team you want.
And you seem to have been getting a lot of good feedback from the community on this mode. It's a new mode, correct?
No, that's been there from the beginning. We extended
people
it
love
back.
that mode. From the
Yeah.
stuff we found on the internet, people enjoy the historical mode.
Yeah, we haven't. It's new in the sense that nobody's ever really tried doing it such an extensive one before. Out of the Park baseball goes back to the 19th century, so I wanted to do something like that with the hockey game, and I talked Sebastian into it when I first came on board, and wound up it was quite a bit of work to get everything implemented, because you basically got hockey stats can't be imported into the game as easily as baseball ones to create a good model of the game. You've got to rate everything subjectively. So I went back and did, it was about, I guess, close to 70 years in the first version, and then added another 15, 16 this year. So you can play for about 85 years of real National Hockey League play with all the real players, and they'll show up in the league. Wayne Gretzky will come in, in 1979, 78, 79, when he really did. And you see all the all-time greats, Hall of Famers, come into the league as rookies and grow and develop, and you can try and build your team up with those real players.
Are you guys connecting at all with those real players? Is there any type of communication ongoing? Any story you might want to share on that?
Not so much so far. It's something I don't think our profile is really quite so high yet. We occasionally get guys from the lower level leagues. We got some information from there was a goaltender in one of the British leagues that was helping us out with some detail there. Back when we did the first version of the game, we had a Canadian player who was over in Italy giving us some information about the Italian league. When I was doing the historical game, it was the grandson of a guy named Les Binkley, who played in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, was able to give me some information about where his granddad and some of his teammates, what teams they belonged to then, when it's not really clear from the historical record. So yeah, you get occasional people stepping in like that, not to the extent like the baseball game that we get.
Still, that must
really
be
prominent.
Yeah, that must be a pretty cool experience for you guys. In any case, because being so passionate about the sport, anytime you get to talk to, it's just like us. We're passionate about PC gaming. We're excited when you guys come and talk to us. Yeah,
absolutely. It's nice to hear from the the guys who are actually playing, get a little real feedback like that. And I guess, but the historical mode it's pretty popular, and people are always a little critical about that, and they look at it and see, well, I remember this season in 1998, and it wasn't exactly like it is in the game.
Not how it went.
Yeah, I'll go in and fix that. I've got no problem making updates like that. If people want to correct what I've done, sure, that's good. And the other mode that I had mentioned yet was the fictional mode. That's where you can set up the league in pretty much any configuration you want. There's about I can't remember offhand, 30 or 40 different possible league setups, but you can set them up in whatever country you want, whatever starting year you want. You want to tinker with the rules, no overtime, or you want to have just a shootout. You can do various things. That's sort of a free-form mode.
Yeah,
and you're not playing as the NHL there. You're just playing as your own. You can set up the league however you want. And that's actually fairly popular for online play, because people aren't limited just to the real setup.
Okay, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. I hope you don't mind. It's not too harsh. But we've seen some criticism on press as far as your research goes in regards to European and Asian teams. And I quote when I say this, but I'd like you to respond to this criticism. I quote an article, a review that I won't need to state from which website, but it states that the European leagues feel like they've been shoehorned into a North American template. Do you think that's a fair assessment, and how do you reply to that?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair assessment, and that's actually something we're spending quite a bit of time on right now. the first version of the game had to be focused on the NHL. And to that extent, since you're focusing on the NHL, the other North American leagues tend to be fairly similar to that. The KHL, the Russian league, also is set up in a similar format. So naturally, they're going to look a little more realistic to begin with. And and on top of that, a lot of the systems are, I don't want to say taken directly from out of the park baseball, but that's the model that we've worked on quite a few cases, and that generally works a little bit better for the North American style of pro sports as opposed to the European football type model, which is the more common thing for most of the European leagues. And what we're starting to do now is going into the mechanics of the European leagues, and in the next update, which will hopefully be out very, very soon, we've actually done a bunch of different things with the German league, changing the way the roster rules work, changing the way ownership goals work, changing the way foreign players are handled. So it gets a little closer to the European experience.
Is there a reason why you guys picked the German team?
Mainly because since we're a German company, the development, Sebastian and Malta, the coders are a little more familiar with the German league. And it's a relatively small and straightforward league, so we can use that as a test bed right now, and see how
sense.
everything works. We had there were a few little things that went wrong with it while we've been testing, and one big thing at the end of last week that kind of put the update on hold for a few days. But we're working through that and finding out all these little problems and seeing how it works in that context, and then now we can, assuming things go fairly well with the update, and things are looking good in there, we can start incorporating that into Sweden and Finland and the major European hockey countries.
Okay.
So it's definitely, it's a very fair criticism that they've made there, and we're definitely going to respond to that and improve that as much as we can. It's probably going to be a bigger project to get complete 100% accuracy in all the AI and all the roster systems, and that's probably going to be our big project for FHM3, revising the way the roster rules work.
I think your community understands that. I think your community knows that, and they can't have the expectations you'd have out of a AAA studio that's got an army of 80 people, 100 people working on a project, and the breadth of your game already is quite impressive with such a small team. Because when we talk to you at the end, we find two main people who are really driving the effort, if I'm getting you right, with an impressive team of committed people around you to kind of come in and support.
Yeah, well, three of us really: Sebastian, myself, and Malte Schwartz, the other coder.
Who does the graphic design? Because there's some really cool little graphics in the game.
That's actually the company's art director, Daniela Delena, who's mostly works freelance. She also works on the baseball game and the handheld games, but
really
the bulk
talented.
of the art in there is her work. Yeah. She's great. She's an
awesome.
amazing artist.
Yeah, please extend her hats off, 2 thumbs up from the European team.
I'll let her know. She'll like that.
Oh, yeah. For those who may not be, and I feel like this question is really the heart of the interview, so feel free to expand on your answer. But for those of us who are not familiar with these types of games, sports management games, can you cover the typical challenges that we're going to find behind the coaching and managing a hockey team, essentially?
Well, the core challenge is putting your team together, finding the players to win as many games as possible. But there are various different ways you can do that. In the NHL, for example, new players come into the league via the draft. When the player turns 18, every team in the league has to select those players. That's done in reverse order of the standings from the previous year. So if you've had a bad season the previous year, you'll have a shot at getting a very good player. If you've been successful, the player is not going to be quite so good. You can also do things like sign free agents if the player's contract runs out with one team under certain circumstances. If he's old enough, and you're allowed to sign that player onto your team with no compensation. And so there's a matter of figuring out which of those players you want to go after. You've also got your farm team underneath of you. You can send young players down to that to develop and improve. If it's going to be, because if you put a young player on the top level team right away, and the league is just too much for him to begin with, his performance is going to suffer. He'll become unhappy, and he won't develop properly. And the happiness, that's also a big part of it. Players are all the players want to play as often as possible and on a winning team, but your team may not always be winning, and you may not always be able to fit them into the lineup in the way that they want. So you have to manage their happiness, and there are various different ways of doing that. Giving them different roles within the team, giving them responsibilities like being a captain or an alternate captain. And that's the gist of it for the NHL setting. In other leagues, there are different challenges in the junior leagues. Obviously, they've got an upper age limit, usually 20. So your players are, how, regardless of how well you develop a player, he's gone once he's 21 years old. So it's a constant cycle of bringing new players in, finding them, developing them as quickly as possible, and hoping that they're not so good that the NHL takes them away early from you.
Yeah, and we'll touch a little bit on that when we get into the actual match engine and how you guys conceived that and designed it. But you must, as developers, you must always say, was that the question of subjectivity and versus objectivity must pop up quite frequently. Basically on because if I'm listening to what you're saying, the decisions I'm making as a manager, even from a business standpoint, who do I put up, who do I bring down? It would be very easy for people like you who are so passionate about the games and have probably very strong opinions about the teams and the players and the games and the management of some companies to not ingest that into your game and keep it as neutral and objective as possible. Or am I completely off?
No, that definitely happens. I mean, and for the hardcore fans the hardcore hockey fans tend to have expectations that they know exactly how certain players should behave in the game. A player should get this number of points. He shouldn't be sent to the minors. This team should always re-sign this player. So, and that's actually some of the appeal of the fictional game. People have said to me, well, I like playing fictional because I don't have all these preconceived notions of how the players should be rated. And if the game doesn't agree with me, that doesn't ruin my immersion. And to some degree, if you're coming in, you're not a serious hockey fan, you're playing in the NHL, you can enjoy the game in much the same way I enjoy Football Manager, because I'm not a huge soccer fan. I can play the games and I don't have the expectations about how the team should do or how the players should be rated.
And to the newcomers, it's actually an incredibly intimidating game to get into. Let's be honest. Even if you love hockey, to make that step towards playing your game, to me, it's an intimidating experience. And but it's also, I think it springs a lot of curiosity. People who are passionate about the game are going to be naturally attracted to the potential of becoming addicted to FHM2. So how do you guys deal with the learning curve? How do you manage this issue? Tutorials, team practice, all that good stuff. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, we don't have a lot in the game right now. I mean, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement for bringing people who are relatively new to the game or into the type of game or even the sport itself into the game. We've obviously got the manual. We try to do a lot of tool tips. There's still not as many as I would like to have in there, but I mean, that's, in my opinion, it's best to have everything as self-explanatory as possible within the game. So you can, hover your mouse over something and get a little explanation of what a certain statistic or rating does within the context of the game. And then we have, we've done some work with the setup wizards when you're initially beginning the game, particularly in fictional, where it'll walk you through and take you and say, at this stage you're adding your minor league and you can have these rules with it and it will have this effect. But there's definitely a huge amount of work to be done. If you look at the out of the park baseball, they've been around for 16 years and they're well ahead of us in that department. And they are pretty successful at bringing people who aren't familiar with baseball and I think baseball is even more intimidating than hockey to someone who isn't familiar with the sport. And they're getting people who aren't necessarily huge baseball fans. And if they can bring them into the game like that, we can start adapting things that they're using and use that to get people into hockey.
And yet, this is still your third title, technically, because you've released FHM 2014 beta, and then you released FHM 2014.
Yeah, well, that was technically all one title, but yeah, we did
Sure.
it in beta mode starting. It was I think we let it go March or April 2013, not long after I'd come in.
What do you guys
And then,
What did you guys decide to drop the year from the name?
Rich,
Is there any reason? I don't mean to put you on the spot. It feels very usually when there's usually a meaning. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's usually a meaning when a studio drops the year from the name. Either they don't plan on they plan on developing the game moving forward with that same title. They feel they reach a milestone, a stepping stone, so they want to develop on that platform and maybe not promise the release of a 2017. Or they actually feel like this is the official game that we're going to stick to. We're very pleased with it, and there's meaning to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah, well, in our case, what happened? We originally this version of the game that's out now was going to be FHM 2015, but we had a few delays, and we completely overhauled a lot of the internals of it based on the feedback that we had, and basically it wasn't going to be practical to release it at the same time at the beginning of the year last year in 2014, like we would have done, like we would have liked to have done. So we pushed it back and instead released beginning of the hockey season this September 2015. And at that point, we decided, well, should we stick with the year in the naming format? And Out of the Park baseball has been for quite a while now, for the last few years, just been using. Well, conveniently, it's Out of the Park 16, and we're heading into 2016 next year, so it looks like it's syncing up nicely. But that is actually the 16th version of Out of the Park baseball.
Yeah, well,
so we decided to move over to the same format with FHM. So this is FHM2, and when we release the next version next September, hopefully will be in September 2016. It'll be FHM3, and we'll just stick with that naming.
So you guys are still on a yearly rotation.
That's the plan.
At least attempting to be. That's funny because I don't want to get too much into it because we still have a couple questions, especially about user interface and game mechanics as a whole. But there's a lot of criticism about that. Not so much from the development and not so much from developers, studios, fundraisers obviously love it. But gamers don't necessarily like the fact that sports games are coming out every year. It's the only genre that kind of falls in that pressure. You gotta release a title every year. Maybe outside of course Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, and just those massive titles. And at the end of the day, we're finding ourselves buying copies of FIFA every year, and it's exactly the same game. I mean, with just a couple of tweaks.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing for us to avoid that trap, it's a little easier because we're a relatively new game and there's lots and lots of things we can add to the game, is to make sure we're adding a lot of content and new things and making it worth the user's while to buy the game every year. Like next year, for example, we're hoping to get international play into the game, so that'll be a big selling feature. And I don't ever want it to be just this is a roster update with the same old game, and please pay us again for this.
An expansion pack.
I don't want to get into that trap of doing it. Basically, I mean, the way sports management games have evolved, whether it's us or Out of the Park Baseball or Football Manager or any of the other games that are out there that have wound up going into this yearly model, the equivalent for outside in other genres would be DLC. You'd be paying, you buy the base game, whether it's, Destiny or World of Warcraft. Well, World of Warcraft's a little different, but or the one example I like to use is the Paradox games, like Crusader Kings. I bought the base game Crusader Kings. I've probably paid twice that price now in downloadable content for it. But I mean, that's their model. They keep they can stick with one game through a development cycle, and that runs out 3-4 years instead of putting out a new one every year. They're just adding more and more to it. And we're basically doing the same thing with the hockey game instead, but we just don't release the new updates for it piecemeal and ask you to pay for them. We just put them all together beginning of the year with the data update as well, and you buy that at the beginning of the year.
Well, and that's fair. Before we move to our two last questions, and then we'll do a Q&A, ask your questions if you're in the chat, because we're going to give a copy of the game generously donated from the studio, TP Development, so thank you guys for doing this. There's two major questions left, Jeff. The first one, user interface. It's a major overhaul from FHM 2014. Why? What were some of the weaknesses in 2014 that made you go through so much work?
Well, there was a ridiculous amount of clicking for one, just getting through. If you wanted to see, say, a player's historical record, you were having to go through 3-4 menus. So that's obviously the fewer clicks, the better. There were simply better ways to present everything with the drop-down lists that we've got now. As it happened, Out of the Park Baseball took a big step forward last year with their interface. They overhauled all of that, and so we had basically that whole code base to work from. So it made sense to bring it in for ours, because I mean the first version of FHM 214 did not look terribly graphically appealing. There were nice elements to it, but it could have been laid out much better. And, we've made big changes to that this year, and we'll continue doing that. I mean, there's still things that I'm not crazy about and would like to improve, and we'll keep doing that. Eventually you want to get it looking something like the ideal interface is basically like you're looking at a hockey league's website and being able to get information as quickly through the game as you would if you were just doing it on your browser.
Okay. And for the match engine, how has it changed from FHM 2014? How content are you with the results and statistics processed out of the decisions the player make? Would you call it a fair and accurate system so far?
I think so. Basically, what we did with the match engine was completely tear the whole engine and tear the whole thing out that we had used last year. That produced fairly good statistics, but in a way that we weren't really thrilled with. Didn't use the player ratings as much as they should have been used. It wasn't a very fun thing to watch. You couldn't really sit in the game. You would get the occasional report of what was going on, but you couldn't get the play-by-play that we've added this year. What we've replaced it with this year is a system that divides the ice up into a bunch of different smaller zones, tracks where players are supposed to be when the puck is in each zone, depending on who has it and who doesn't. And then the whole game system sort of flows outward from that. That lets us do things like describe much more accurately what's going on in the ice, since you don't have the the nice top-down animated interface like you would in EA sports games like NHL 2015. So we need to rely on the text play-by-play to describe what's going on. The new engine is much better for that. And statistically, there were just certain problem areas, especially at the extremes with the other match engine. We couldn't get the typical scoring leaders in the league weren't really as high as they should have been, even though the average league scoring was about right. And it was really noticeable in historical play, where you get back in the 70s and 80s, there tended to be a lot more goals scored in a typical NHL game, particularly in the 80s. And with the old engine, it was really noticeable that it just couldn't get up to that level. This new one, what we've done with it, it's a lot more flexible in what it can handle, and the numbers come out beautifully. You can play a historical game from, if you start in the 70s and play up through the 90s, Wayne Gretzky will probably be within about, assuming he doesn't get injured or anything, 5% of what his actual stats were for that 20-year period. So it handles the extremes much better, and where it does things like fighting, which is a big deal to a lot of people in the community. They want the right guys fighting. They want them happening at the right time, and that's an ongoing thing. We're still working on it, and I'm doing a lot of work on that, trying to get that exactly right.
I'm sure. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the questions. There's quite a few questions. The first one
Right.
from our technician from the for the nights for every night actually. Stylomax, has the publisher considered drawing in more players by having more graphical action, either 2D or 3D, showing actual players rather than text descriptions of what occurs? That was his main criticism indeed.
Yeah, well, eventually we'd like to do that, but it's a big eventually because that's really, really resource intensive. We just started getting into doing 3D modeling in the last couple of years. Uh, in the baseball game, Jorn Guderian, the lead, the guy who runs that department for the baseball game, has done a really incredible job with getting 3D stadiums in and adding some animation to it. And eventually we'll get there with hockey. The question is when. I know that when I was working on East Side Hockey Manager with SI, that was basically an entire year's development. One guy, Riz Remus, a
Sure.
very talented developer, and he also had all the resources of SI behind him because they've been doing Football Manager. Obviously, they've got the animated games in the animated match view, so they've got a huge amount of experience with that, and they were able to. Even with all of that, it still took a full year of development away from other things that could have been done. So right now, it's just a matter of where are our priorities. Is that going to add a lot to the gameplay experience? And if we do that, what are we going to
Yeah, what's the
what do we have to
trade-off?
put off? Yeah, what's the
Yeah,
trade-off?
but to be the angel's advocate. Actually, the game looks polished. It's nice. It's you guys already put a lot of care in the design. It's obvious. I appreciate it. So the hats off. I think it's an improvement, and I can see how over time you guys are eventually gonna get there. Jeff, the second question is from Dirty Plunger Arng. I believe that's his name, so I'll try my best. Jeff, do the teams in the game mimic pro teams, even though they don't hold the pro badge yet?
Yeah, they do. We've got the real players and team names for most of the leagues. The only thing we can't do is have things like the actual uniforms. So you'll have things that are sort of approximately the right color, or have the league logos, or pictures of the trophies. Can't have the Stanley Cup shown or anything like that. If and when we eventually get a license for it, which will hopefully be in not too many versions from now, we'll be able to do a much better job of having the full-blown NHL with all the nice uniforms and graphics and everything. I can't even wrap my head around all the different things we'd be able to do with it, but yeah, that'd be terrific. But right now you do get the real team names and players. You just don't get the nice pretty pictures with them.
Of course. Third question: what are some of the difficulties your team has experienced working with artificial intelligence? And this one comes from Snow My Gosh.
Let's see. Well, the tough one, the really tough one, is managing the rosters on each team. The NHL is the really bad part of that, because they've got a lot of small rules that govern the way players can be moved from one team to another, or between a farm team and a professional team, how they have to be drafted. And conveniently, they do publish their collective bargaining agreement with the players, which lays all of that out. But it's not always possible to get every detail of that into the game, either because it's technically unfeasible to model something, or it makes the AI stupid. And when we run into something like that, I tried to follow Sid Meier's rule: if there's something that makes the AI look dumb, take it out.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Do you also use real coaches? I need to see Babcock and his glorious hair. Again, from Dirty Plunger Arng.
Babcock's in. His hair isn't there, though.
I know. Fair enough. So the short answer is yes, you do.
Real coach. Although actually, I should say, that's only in the modern mode. Historical mode, that's a project I want to work on and get all the historical coaches in eventually. But
wow,
right now they're fictional. Although you will get some. Occasionally, real players will retire and go into coaching. That happens in the modern game as well. So you'll see some familiar names as coaches in the historical game, but they'll be when you start the game out, it'll all be fictional staff and coaching and general managers.
And I'm by fighting between players, company sphere. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does this game include? I think you mean PvP, player versus player. Does this game include player versus player? Can you play against other people on the internet?
Yeah, that's actually something that's new this year. We've added a multiplayer mode. It's really fairly rudimentary at this point. One player, or you can have more than one player, is appointed as a commissioner. Everyone sends in, and then he can add. Well, I think I don't remember what the upper limit is, but if you've got 30 players you want to play with, you can have 30 people playing in a National Hockey League and everyone sends in their roster moves to this commissioner. He merges them all into his game. We'll simulate forward a few days. Some people will only do one game at a time. Some people will do a week. Some people will do two. And then sends the updated players back to the updated league files back to the players. They can see what's happened, and then they make their next set of roster moves. So yeah, you can play against humans as well. If you go in our forum, there's a number of leagues that are actively recruiting for that right now.
Yes. Okay, Marcus. As far as new gamers coming into this game for the first time, I think we've already covered it. So thanks for asking the question. Company Sphere also answered it. The game has multiplayer, and Jeff gave you all the answers you could have sought. Moving forward, are there downfalls to the use of volunteers for your research team? Again, from Snow My Gosh.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, since everything is volunteer effort, it's no one's full-time job, and I can't really say to them, well, you absolutely have to have this done by such and such a date. I mean, they know what the deadline is every week. We've got it's actually tonight, about 3 hours from now, the deadline for their roster work to come in for that week. But if they can't do it in a particular week, hey, no problem. I'm not going to push them on that. If somebody disappears for several months at a time, or well, more likely weeks at a time, then I'm going to have to start looking for a replacement for them, or at least temporary help to cover them while they're gone. But yeah, on the other hand, we've also had people who've been with us right from the start and are regularly putting in their updates and helping out where they can, pretty much every single week.
Okay, from a question from Martin Newman. It's an interesting question. I'm anticipating your answer will be no, but I'm going to ask you anyways. Will the game have a type of money system, like a trading system for hockey players?
I'm not really sure what he means by the question, like contract system for the...
I think he wants to see, I'm guessing, real money being thrown into the game. I could be off. Martin, correct us if we are.
If that's it, no real plans for that at this point. We see how much trouble the daily fantasy guys are getting into down in the States.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat illegal too. I think it's not something you can freely do.
Yeah, I'm not sure Steam would like us doing that on there either. So no plans in that area for the moment.
What elements within the game are customizable, or is everything more mandated and streamlined throughout play? Aside from the mode where you can tweak the rules, teams, etc. And this is the last question we'll be asking. And Snow My Gosh, my dear friend, you win the game. So Alti, please send him the Steam key. And Jeff, please answer the question.
Well, yeah, like I said, they're in fictional mode. Everything is obviously a lot more customizable there. You can set the location of the teams and the size of their arenas, pretty much anything you want there. In the modern mode, you're a little more restricted, but you can still do things like at the beginning of each season, you get the option of changing a few of the rules, and you can also add expansion teams. That's a new thing we've done this year. So the NHL has been talking about moving to possibly Las Vegas and Quebec in the next few seasons. So if you want to do that, once 2016 comes up, you can add the expansion team, take over one of those, and draft all your players for it from the existing team, and basically build a franchise up right from the very beginning. So there's a big challenge to that. And there's various other things that are customizable. We've got commissioner mode, which I mentioned before in the context of the online league, but that also can be done for a single player game that allows you to go in and edit players as you see fit. You can change the way their portrait looks or change their name even, or their ratings, anything like that. So there's a lot of customization. Out of the Park Baseball is a lot more flexible in that regard. Right now, they've been doing it a lot longer than us, but we'll keep going on that direction and keep adding things in that area.
And that's awesome. Jeff, is there anything you want to leave us off with? Anything we might have missed? Anything you would like to mention before we go? The time's
this
now.
was a great interview, actually. That's some of the best questions I've ever had.
Thank you. From a guy who actually is
from a guy who doesn't even know hockey.
I have no idea what I'm doing here.
No, that was great. I mean, that's obviously we'd like everybody to have a look at it. Not giving any secrets or anything, but it is Black Friday sale on Steam coming up this week. Can't say how much it's going to be going down, but you can count on it'll be going down in price for sure for a little bit.
And that's always good news to broken gamers with a broken wallet.
Yep, like me.
Fair enough, just like me as well. Jeff, we really enjoyed it as well. So thank you for doing this, for taking the time, answering our many questions. Thanks everybody in chat for taking the time to stick around.